For the Record, edited version. November 2, 2020 by Anna von Reitz. Late yesterday an alert fellow researcher sent me a most intriguing gift, a series of essays presenting a step-by-step analysis of the Lincoln assassination. The material was so intriguing in fact, that I allowed myself the very rare pleasure of plunging into it immediately. I encourage all of you, those of you who have been following along for a while and have dots to connect, to do the same and please share so that this material doesn't go missing. www.centerforaninformedamericA-of-a-presidential-assassination-part-I. For those of you who care about this country and who fully realize that it went off the tracks during the Civil War and has never been healthy, right or sane since then, take the couple hours needed to read and think about the information contained in the 12 brief essays in this series about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Link posted above. If you have been following along with the history we have presented concerning the great fraud that commenced with the Civil War and the intrinsically fraudulent nature of this mercenary conflict being presented to us as a war, you will recognize many familiar leitmotifs that resonate and echo between the Lincoln assassination and the murder of JFK, 9/11, the Montauk experiments, the use of crisis actors in false flags, the burial of Osama bin Laden and many other odd similarities that will set your gray cells jangling. These odd repetitive patterns, for example, both Lincoln and Kennedy's deaths being reported before they happened, just like the BBC reporter talking about the collapse of Building 7 before it happened, these things are not coincidental. These are patterns that exist because the same people and organizations are responsible and this is the way they do things. For our very adept investigators, bear down with me on the central question of what actually was happening at the Seward Mansion that night in April of 1865. What were those cabinet officers doing at Seward's house in the middle of the night? Contrary to what you might assume, even in the midst of celebration over Lee's surrender, Good Friday was still a solemn holy day in 1865, and there was considerable sentiment against entertainments, plays, fireworks, and other such activities taking place on that Good Friday. Many people felt that it should be a time to mourn, not only the willing sacrifice of Jesus, but the destruction and losses of the war. A time to pray. A time to think. Not a time to gloat over fallen brethren. Also, in the days before electric streetlights, it was not common for people to be out visiting door to door past 8 o'clock at night. So why were the senior officers of Lincoln's cabinet out and about, just popping by, for no apparent reason at Secretary of State Seward's house at 10 o'clock at night on a Good Friday, when Secretary Seward was well known to be badly injured? That's beyond odd in the 19th century, that's unheard of, except in the case of an emergency. And the real emergency, Lincoln's assassination, was in progress as they arrived at Seward's mansion. The easy answer is that Seward was a co-conspirator who had to be brought up to date. His injuries had immobilized him at a crucial time, and now that the game was afoot at Ford's Theater, they had to fill him in and get all their storylines straight in preparation for rolling out a new government. We now know that that new government was a military coup under the direction of Papist and British sympathizers, a coup that would be initialized under President Andrew Johnson, a malleable Democrat who was too ignorant to cause much trouble, and consolidated under Hiram S. Grant, aka Ulysses S. Grant, whose basic role was to look the other way and keep the Union Army happy by providing all sorts of opportunities for payola and graft. Grant, Sherman, and other Union generals did not support Lincoln's kindly vision of healing the nation and restoring brotherhood between North and South. They had seen his so-called restoration bills, intended to stabilize the Southern economy, repair infrastructure, and get people back to work. Lincoln even had guts enough to propose a living wage for plantation workers. And frankly, scarlet after going through what they went through, the generals wanted the South to suffer. They wanted vengeance and payola and plenty of it. They wanted General Sherman's vision of an abject, burned out, raped, and pillaged South, carved up into military districts, and placed under eternal subjugation. They would never forget and they would never forgive, and the same to the American Indians as far as the generals were concerned. Lincoln was not a hardliner, not vengeful, and worst of all, he was not financially incompetent. Grant was a much better fit for the liking of the British Queen, who had a lot of money invested in the Northern War effort and wanted prompt, abundant, and draconian returns from the bankruptcy trustees. The British interests lost no time after Lincoln's death in setting up a Scottish commercial corporation doing business as the United States of America, Incorporated, and using this doppelganger to impersonate our unincorporated Federation of States. They thereby gained access to our national credit, even though our states and our federation were never involved in the war and owed no reparations, and they began to spend our credit in exactly the same way any identity thief gains access to their victim's credit and spends. They also set up military districts in the southern states and special admiralty courts, often called carpetbagger courts, by the victims, practicing the king's equity law against the helpless Southerners. Using these foreign courts and foreign laws, they methodically stripped the South bare in the name of war reparations. They also published a phony corporate constitution in 1868, and proceeded to amend it however they saw fit, without regard for any ratification by the states of the Union. As their constitution was only a charter for a foreign corporation, the members of the U.S. Congress could issue by law changes as amendments, without ratification or agreement from the states. The people of this country were hoodwinked and deceived by these con men, and believed that these were legitimate amendments being made to their actual constitutions by men entrusted and responsible for doing so. It was under these conditions and by these self-interested perpetrators that the infamous 14th Amendment to the Corporation's Constitution was issued, arbitrarily conferring municipal citizenship on former slaves and certain other classes of people, mainly people of color, and then arbitrarily defining those municipal citizens of the United States as criminals, liable for any debt or charge made against them. This greased the wheels for the Brits to collect more war reparations from the victims of this scheme, this time seizing upon their good names, their bodies, and the value of their labor as municipal slaves. The evil that began then has continued virtually unabated for 160 years. These evil corporations were allowed to flourish and to operate under color of law, ruthlessly suppressing the American Indians, bilking the states of the Union, conferring foreign citizenship obligations on Americans, and thereby subjecting those Americans to foreign British equity courts. You can guess how much equity the king's officers gave us. And the popes who are responsible for the lies called corporations did nothing at all to chastise or discipline or limit any of this. Oh, no, they simply changed hats to their Roman pontiff office, and raked in their share of the profits from all of this fraud. After all, under the Roman civil law of the municipal government, let him who will be deceived, be deceived. Now we come to the bonebreaker of them all. The American people woke up. They recognized the great fraud. They came forward and they nailed it. So now under that same pagan, inexorable Roman civil law, the great fraud vitiates everything that has occurred. Now that this has been reiterated for you, you will find the clues and evidence included in the articles shared above, all that much more tantalizing and indicative. How is it that John Surratt, the chief suspect other than John Wilkes Booth, wound up in Rome, working as one of the elite papal guards? Perhaps all of this is best explained by observing that both sides of this mercenary conflict called the American Civil War are ultimately owned and controlled by the Pope, and the real point of the entire purported conflict was to get the hapless American people misidentified and in the middle of this war, where either side could prey on them as presumed enemy combatants. And now, the tides have turned. The municipal government is tail between legs and hunting for the door. The British territorial government stands covered in gross dishonor, and even now, is proposing to substitute itself for our actual long-lost American Federal Republic. The actual Americans are here, staring them down. We have sounded the worldwide alarm. We have told both China and Russia, don't even think about blaming us or attacking our country. We have been victims of these parasites ourselves. Why give them the pleasure of fooling everyone and murdering their creditors again? Let's turn on our heels and put an end to the sources of this worldwide rot and be done with the sons of Satan. Be sure to read the next article, The Roman Church, the Guilds, and the Hellfire Club, so that everyone knows how the system is set up and how it works and what the inevitable conclusions of allowing it to go on are.
Links to Anna's articles and resources can be found in the video description box. Thank you for subscribing, liking and sharing.